be starting shortly. Thank you for signing on, and the program should be starting in about 7 minutes. Good evening. Welcome. My name is Chani Krinsky. My husband Mendy and I direct the Chabad Center in Needham, Massachusetts. One of the silver linings of moving our events online is the ability to unite with people from literally the entire world. So I want to take this opportunity to welcome everyone. We have many people from Massachusetts and Maryland, but we even have from as far as Alaska in the US, and from a few people from Australia have signed on, so welcome. This evening is a joint effort of 4 Chabad centers. I want to introduce Hindi Light from Anne Arundel County, Maryland, Tzivi Kievman from Mansfield, Rachi Kievman from Milford, and on behalf of all of us, we want to thank you all for joining us. We would like to begin this evening with a short prayer. We will recite Psalm 20 together and pray for the speedy recovery of all those who need it, and specifically for a colleague of ours, a rabbi whose life mission is to help people from around the world be able to study Torah. Mechayim Shneir Zalman Yehuda ben Hinda Yocheved be completely healthy right away. The psalm is on your screen now, and we can say it together first in Hebrew and then English. Lamnat Seyach Mizmar LaDavid. Ya'ancha Adonai b'yayim tzara yisagevcha Shem Elohei Yaakov. Yishlach ezracha mikaydesh umitziyain yisadeka. Yiskar kol minchasecha va'ailascha yedashna sela. Yiten lecha chilvavecha v'chol atzascha yimale. Niranana b'shua secha uv'shem Eloheinu nidgal. Yimale Adonai kol mishale secha. Ata yadati ki hashia Adonai mishichai. Ya'aneu mishmei kadshai b'vurais yesha yaminai. Eila v'rechev ve'eila basusim va'anachnu b'shem Adonai Eloheinu naskir. Hema karu v'nafalu va'anachnu kamnu v'nisaydad. Adonai Hashia hamelach yanenu v'yayim karenu. I was going to do it in English. Rachi, you want to put it back up? Sorry. The conductor, a song of David. May the Lord answer you on a day of distress. May the name of the God of Jacob fortify you. May he send your aid from his sanctuary, and may he support you from Zion. May he remember all of your meal offerings, and may he accept your fat burnt offerings forever. May he give you as your heart desires, and may he fulfill all your counsel. Let us sing praises for your salvation, and let us assemble in the name of our God. May the Lord fulfill all your requests. Now I know that the Lord saved his anointed. He answered him from his holy heavens with the mighty acts of salvation from his right hand. These trust in chariots and these in horses, but we mention the name of the Lord our God. They kneel and fall, but we rise and gain strength. O Lord, save us. May the King answer us on the day we call. Hindi. Hindi Light.
What is she supposed to do?
She's supposed to introduce me now.
Do you hear me now? Hello? Hello? Okay.
Hindi, we
Hi,
hear you. Go ahead.
everyone. Now's the moment we've all been waiting for. Okay, do you hear? Okay. Hi for the third time. Now's the moment we've all been waiting for. I'd like to introduce Mrs. Miriam Lipskier. Miriam and her husband direct the Chabad Student Center at Emory University. And Miriam is the proud mother of 8 children, thank God. Miriam is a dynamic teacher of Jewish thought and practice and lectures internationally. We are so grateful to have her here with us tonight. Instead of having one person talking the whole evening, we decided to have a sort of dialogue back and forth. So together with Miriam, Mrs. Tzivi Kievman of Chabad of Mansfield, Massachusetts, will lead the conversation. But before I turn over the mic over to them, I just want to point out that there were some questions that were sent in advance. We are going to try to get to as many as possible. But if there, as the evening progresses, if there are any more additional questions that you'd like to send in, please send it to 781-727-8944. Again, text it to 781-727-8944, and we will try our best to address them. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy.
Welcome, Miriam. I'm Sivi Kievman. Welcome. I think it's amazing that we're all gathered here together, the power of so many. These are some of the questions and thoughts that we had. The lifestyle depicted in the series seems so foreign, but also fascinating. Do people actually choose to live in this type of intense community, or are they just born into it and submit themselves to it?
So that's one way to jump right in. Hello to everybody. I just want to make sure you can hear me and it's clear. So just give me a thumbs up before we get going. We're good. I know with this amazing technology that we're all brought together in our own homes, we got to make sure everything's running. So I think that's, you know, we're talking about this series that has really gripped and fascinated so many people. And I want to just make, before I even answer the question, I want to make a couple disclaimers. One is I'm no expert in, you know, cinema and Netflix and what makes for good drama and theater. Obviously needs to have some tension and some real dysfunction. And I don't want anything that I say to be misconstrued as trying to make excuses for what's obviously an individual story, because this series was based on an autobiography. I know it wasn't followed exactly, but it was an individual woman's story, Deborah Feldman. And I think every individual, every human being on planet Earth, the way they perceive the unfoldings of their life is true to them. And as fellow human beings, we have to honor, respect, nurture, love, cherish any human being who went through pain, drama, struggle, challenge, and really just hold space, for that is the truth of their story. And I don't want in any way to be taken as, you know, I'm undermining that this is what this individual actually went through at all. So I want to say that at the outset. But I do want to say that what we want to focus on tonight is how this entire community is portrayed through the eyes of one individual. So while the individual story is obviously accurate in her, you know, mind and her experience, the portrayal of the entire community is what we're going to be focusing on. And I wanted to make just a clear distinction between that. But Sivi, you asked a good question. It just seems like so many of those customs and traditions and goings on seem so strange, very fascinating. And why would anybody kind of, you know, be a part of this community unless they were born in? And the best way I could answer that question, and I think with most of us, is personally. And when I say personally, I'm referring to my own family, because both of my parents grew up in profoundly secular homes, wonderful, happy homes where they knew they were Jewish, but they didn't do anything about it. What I mean by that is they didn't affiliate with any denomination. And even the typical, you know, once a year, a high holiday service or a Seder or a bar bat mitzvah was not what their families did. They were doing the American dream, and they knew they were Jewish, but their brand of Judaism was like, leave us alone, you know, we're busy. And so what was fascinating in my own family story is that both of my parents, when they were college students, and my husband and I are privileged to actually run a campus for almost 20 years we run a Chabad house on campus. So I get to, most of my life is interacting with college students between the ages of, you know, 18 and 28, who really have the time and the ability to focus on where am I heading in life, and what am I passionate about, and what are my values, and what's important to me, and who am I, and who am I in this world? And my parents had those same questions that everybody kind of goes through. And We don't have time to get into it, although it's a fascinating story, but they really found so much joy and light and beauty and meaning and depth and passion and happiness within the context of a Hasidic community. And so these very liberated, my mom was the valedictorian of Cooper Union and art school in Manhattan, and my dad was, you know, a cool guy. He was the president of his fraternity and on the debate team. So these weren't people who kind of had, let's say, what you would say normative issues, but they found such a meaning and joy within the context of a Hasidic lifestyle and community. And so for me, coming from that background, and I wanted to just give you, you know, that 2 minutes of where I'm coming from here, watching a series where you see almost none of that. You see a lot of dysfunction, a lot of pain, a lot of drama, a lot of really heart-wrenching, sad situations, which again, they happen because human beings happen wherever they find themselves. Challenges come with life, but ultimately shining a light on a community where everybody looks like they share the same, you know, issues and dysfunction. From the perspective that I come from, yeah, this series really didn't do anything in terms of showing another dimension and another side where people could actually find such joy and happiness and light in this lifestyle. And that wasn't really depicted there. And I know you asked, you know, is this something only people who are in there have to submit to? And the straight up answer is there are so many people who actually choose a more religious, structured, whether you call it Orthodox or Hasidic, we'll get to the labels soon, but choose it. Why? For the depth and beauty and meaning that is there. And what we want to do tonight is kind of pull apart and unpack some of what you may have seen on the series and clarify what is a Jewish perspective, what is the Torah perspective. And I just want to make one other clarification. Just in the sake of like transparency and honesty. My parents, when they became apart and took on more and more Jewish customs and traditions slowly, and then raised us by sending us to a cheder where we spoke Yiddish in New Jersey, I think it's important to distinguish that my parents were involved with Chabad, which is one denomination within the Hasidic spectrum, and the series focuses on Satmar. And just to give a little clarity, under the Orthodox umbrella, you have many, many different variations of how traditional Judaism is practiced. You have very modern Orthodox, plain Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox, and then even under the Hasidic umbrella, you have so many different Hasidim from different backgrounds, whether it was in Poland, whether it was in Ukraine, whether it was in Russia, where they originated from. And among the Hasidic groups, many are very, very similar, but the two that are probably most diametrically opposed from one another is Chabad on one end and Satmar on the other in a few specific areas. And the only one that I'll take a moment to point out is how the group or the community choose to interact with the world around them. So Chabad embraces and is so open and so excited to share and to learn and to be open to the community around them, and is also careful about sheltering and kind of filtering the influences coming in, but sharing and embracing is a very fundamental element in Chabad philosophy, which is a very ideological. Chabad actually stands for wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, that those affect our emotions. And the Satmar approach has a perspective where there's so many negative influences in the world, and there's so much that we don't want to be exposed to. And so the doors are much more firmly shut from the outside influences coming in, and even those inside going out. And that's only one distinction, but I think it's an important theme, you know, in the course of this dialogue. And so I wanted to say it on the outset so we could refer back to it.
Thank you. Thank you for shedding light and putting it in perspective. What's with all the rigidity? It seems like it's such a formal way of life with so many rules and regulations and a very, very specific way of life. What's with all that?
Okay, so I think it's actually really, that's a great question. And I'll tell you why, because in our culture, we all know people, friends or family, who are really passionate and enthusiastic and committed to you name it. So I'll give you an example. I have a really good friend who's a runner, and she runs marathons. And when she's preparing, leading up to a marathon, she is so structured and focused and rigid about when she runs and how many miles per day and what she wears when she runs, how she sleeps, how she eats. And everything is revolving around this passion that she actually is focused on. And in our culture, that's pretty normal. And we view it with, wow, that's brave and that's bold and that's awesome that you're doing this. And you have it in so many ways where you see people, someone will spend $500 on a bottle of wine and will say, oh, it's a connoisseur. And someone will spend crazy money on the last ticket to a baseball game and knows every stat of every player and every team. And we're like, oh, a sports aficionado, and on, patron of the arts, because you spend $1 million on art and the background and the history. And we have really positive, glowing terms to describe an intense commitment or knowledge or investment in any pursuit. And somehow when it comes to an individual in our culture focusing on a religious or a spiritual pursuit, somehow the language that we use to describe this passionate commitment that does come with borders and descriptions and rules and regulations, we kind of use all these terms, fanatic, zealot, nut job, whatever, you can fill in the blank. And it's just interesting to comment that yes, living any sort of lifestyle that you're committed to usually comes with a framework. It usually comes with guidelines, what you would eat, what you wouldn't eat, what you would wear, what you wouldn't wear, what you would spend, etc. And I think that you're right, that it actually is a lifestyle that gives you a lot of boundaries, but it's no less vital and passionate for those choosing to practice, because that is actually the pathway for the end result, which is a connection to our Creator and bringing light into this world. And I think what I want to say here is that no matter what your personal level of Jewish involvement or Jewish knowledge or Jewish practice, what we have in common is we are all one and the same. We have the same neshama, the same underlining foundation within each of our hearts. The word neshama really just means soul, but it means there's a piece of God within each and every one of us. How we choose to express it may be completely different from one another. However, our essence is the same. And the more that we focus on what we have in common, the more love and light we have in the world. And the more we focus on how your custom or your dress or your tradition is different from mine, and I'm a little suspicious and you're a little strange and this is a little intense and a little bizarre, that kind of causes a separation between people. And I think ultimately it's kind of, if give me a thumbs up if you have a sibling, I know the Zoom, we have to is anyone out there? Give me a thumbs up if you have a sibling. So you're one and the same, but how different are you? How many of you would say you and your sibling are very, very similar? Most of us would say, oh my gosh, we're complete opposites. But we know that we have this fundamental connection, even though our passions or our interests or our character or our hobbies, etc., may be so opposite from one another, but at our core, we're one. And I think that's just so important to remember when viewing another Jewish group, that it may seem so foreign and so strange, and we're going to unpack some of those rituals and traditions and get into them, the meaning, the background, the why of it. But I think the starting point needs to be understanding with love and compassion that this is part of our family. It may be a small part, it may be a part we don't really understand or relate to. And for some people, it's like, oh gosh, I don't want to have anything to do with these people because I give up. This seems so strange. So I think that's really a very important starting point to understand that embracing boundaries in one's life actually often leads to great fulfillment and meaning, and seeing it from that context puts it in a different light than just seeing random traditions and rituals without the greater context and framework of what is meant to be accomplished by going through the lifestyle and all the different, commandments and traditions that come along with it.
Thank you. A very strong thread in the story is you notice that right away the dysfunctional intimate life between the main characters. Is this an accurate description of a Hasidic marriage? Can you shed some light on the intimate dysfunctionality that we see in the movie?
So I'm going to just keep it really short and say Absolutely, unequivocally no. And where am I getting that from? Again, I'm going to reiterate this dysfunctional relationship, obviously with medical issues, and there was some whatever the dysfunction was, it's real, it exists. Every community will have dysfunction where there was a medical concern and other issues that caused a little bit unbelievable that it took a healthy male and female a year to figure out some very simple biological activity that most people would figure out without a whole lot of instruction. But I think, again, I'm not going to comment that this individual had this story and that's what she went through, and we need compassion for anyone who has to go through such an unpleasant, awkward, uncomfortable experience. But I think it's really important to highlight that from a traditional Jewish perspective, meaning on a biblical perspective, there's a mitzvah, which we translate as either, often you hear it translated as commandment or good deed, but it's probably most accurately translated as a connection between one another and our Creator. But there's a mitzvah called Ona in the Torah. It's one of, the fundamentals, and it actually is a mitzvah that is a man's obligation, but a woman's privilege. And what is, this mitzvah about, this kind of biblical imperative, that it's a focus on the pleasure that a couple should experience. And not just that, the actual word Ona means her time, which is very interesting because what it's essentially saying, and I know I'm generalizing here because not all men and not all women are the same, but what does Ona mean? It means her time. So this is an obligation of a man towards his wife. And generally speaking, most men, if you kind of snap your finger, they more or less can get there in that intimate space, headspace, without a whole lot of like preparation or details in the background. And your average woman, again, with exceptions, if there's dishes in the sink and kids screaming and chaos around and stress in my head and around me, I need to unwind and I'm not feeling it. And it's a much more sensitive thing. And what's fascinating is that on a biblical perspective, thousands of years ago, the idea of a husband being literally instructed to give her time, meaning that mood and that where we're at and what the circumstances are and what you're feeling and what you're thinking, all this chaos going on in the average woman's head needs to kind of be quieted and put into the background in order for this experience to happen. And from a Torah perspective, what is this experience supposed to be? So Ona and pleasure is actually meant to be a passion and a glue that keeps this dynamic of this healthy relationship vibrant and alive and real. And it's a focus that's actually fascinating to me. I have, thank God, 5 boys, and now that they're home studying from yeshiva, I get to eavesdrop what they're learning. So I'm talking a 16-year-old, an 18-year-old. You cannot study in any yeshiva and not come across, like almost on a weekly basis, intimate details about how human beings function, about how intimacy functions, and the fact that this individual, Yankee, on this series seems to have no clue. Forget human warmth and passion and tenderness towards his wife, he seems to like, and somehow it's just so cold and frigid and unhealthy. Even just the technical details, it's almost would be impossible for anyone to sit in yeshiva and not come across some real important details on how God created human bodies to function and relationships to function. And in Judaism, pleasure is something that's meant to be celebrated and enjoyed and experienced in the most beautiful way. And I think the true story behind this is that in most communities, Orthodox, Hasidic, yes, there will always be dysfunction and there will always be a medical issue or a emotional concern because everybody is a human being. But overwhelmingly, the emphasis and the time and the laser focus on how this is such a priority, actually the truth would be that I'm not a scientist and I haven't researched this to give you the lab results, but that these relationships that are kept very private from public view actually have probably some of the most healthy and vibrant connection because it's so prioritized. And I'm saying scheduled, not because it's unromantic and unspontaneous, but because you can't neglect it. You can't just ignore it. You can't just let life get in the way. It's a focus because it's a mitzvah. And if you can give me a thumbs up if you ever heard of a ketubah, saw a ketubah, read a ketubah, was at a wedding where someone got a ketubah, and you know what a ketubah is. It's essentially a marriage document. Today, actually, halachic prenups are done to prevent any issues with this, couple thousand-year-old Aramaic document. But within this document, it's underscored that a husband knows that he is providing food, not just food, clothing, and shelter for his wife, but also giving her time, and that pleasure and intimacy is a priority. And so I think, in short, yes, we did see dysfunction in this series, and yes, it may be true for an individual. It's certainly true that people struggle and have issues in life. That's just a fact. But overwhelmingly, to characterize an entire community that puts such an emphasis on this actual experience is really just a disservice and very far from accurate.
Thank you, we appreciate that. The mikveh scene with an invasive attendant, what role does mikveh actually play in Orthodox and Hasidic lifestyle? Can you shed some light about mikveh?
Yes, so I'm trying to think if we should talk about the attendant first or last. I'll get her out of the way first. If the attendants in mikvahs everywhere on the globe, and if you have a few extra Corona minutes and you want to Google like mikvah.org and put in anywhere in the world that you could think of, the Congo, Kathmandu, whatever, Nepal, put in a place, it'll give you the details and pictures of that mikvah. If mikvah attendants actually made people embarrassed, uncomfortable, scrutinized them, whipped out, cuticle cutters and started doing hygiene touch-ups on them, I don't know that these mikvahs would have people in them, because fundamentally, from a traditional perspective, when I say traditional, I mean Jewish law, halachic, biblical, Talmudic, I'm talking like the origin, foundation of Jewish practice, the attendant has to do two things when she's in the mikvah. Number one, she says, amen to your blessing, that your home should be filled with light and joy. She says, you make the blessing. She says, amen, so may it be. You should have peace in your home. Shalom bayit. A peaceful home, you should have that. That's her one job. And her second job is, she says, kosher, when a woman immerses completely underneath the water, that it was done properly. The responsibility of preparing to immerse in the mikvah, which, by the way, the woman doesn't go to the mikvah because she's dirty. She has to be completely clean before. It's a spiritual immersion, so it has nothing to do with hygiene. But the responsibility of making sure that she's clean is on the woman. If she wants to ask the assistant for help or something, she can choose to do that. But ultimately and fundamentally, that is not the attendant's job. So that's putting the attendant aside. The attendant you saw in that series, I think if that occurred in just about any mikvah on planet Earth, she would be dismissed of her role. And most of the time, mikvah attendants are actually extremely warm and kind-hearted individuals, just as a side. But the more important question is, what's with the mikvah in general? Where does it fit in Jewish life? And I wish that we had an hour to discuss this, but we have like 4 minutes. So I'm going to do a great disservice to this extremely important mitzvah, because it is so fundamental. And I'm not saying it's fundamental because that's my opinion. I'm saying it's fundamental because according to Jewish law, so you could give me a thumbs up if you're a lawyer, married to a lawyer, child of lawyers, but according to Jewish law, listen to this because this is really fascinating. Jewish community needs a lot of things for it to be, vibrant and thriving. So you would have synagogue, you would have, Torahs, you would have Jewish education, you would have a JCC, you would have access to kosher food, etc. All the things that would make up, a Jewish community. And according to Jewish law, a community can mortgage their synagogue, and they can even sell their Torah scroll, which we know is the most fundamental, the Torah. I mean, you can't get more important than that, but that could be mortgaged or sold in order to raise funds to build a mikvah. which tells us one thing and one thing only, that on God's priority list of what's vital for a thriving Jewish community, nothing takes priority over a mikvah. Why? What's mikvah's function and purpose? So again, in like 60 seconds, I'm doing it a really great disservice. Mikvah is the portal to the intimate life of a couple, actually providing not just a connection to God because I'm doing something that's outside of me and I'm kind of welcoming this third, dynamic in the relationship where it's not that the husband is submitting to the wife or the wife is submitting to the husband, but both the husband and wife kind of submit to a higher authority, which is God's. But the actual function of mikvah, the way that it works, is that every individual woman, according to her own cycle, this isn't a communal experience, when she has her cycle and for 1 week following, and this is in biblical verse and in all over, Talmudic literature, etc., God says, listen, I'm like, it's kind of your operating manual for like your iPhone or your laptop or whatever. I'm the programmer. I'm giving you some tips here. You may want to tune in and see how these buttons work. Or you could choose to ignore them. You got free choice, but here's how these buttons work. So what does God say? I'm suggesting that this couple who hopefully connect on many levels, heart, mind, body, soul, all these different ways that they connect, what makes them unique from every other relationship that they have in their lives with siblings or friends or colleagues or coworkers is that they share a sexual, intimate relationship. That's not including anybody else in it. And so what's interesting is that God says, listen, during this time, the couple should hit pause on the physical dynamic of the relationship, which means all of a sudden this relationship, we're still sharing a house and bills and laundry and chaos and stress and calendars and whatever a couple will share, but we're all of a sudden doing this hands off. So that means I'm not touching you and you're not touching me, but we're still communicating, we're still sharing life, but we're doing it in a different way. And now when the woman at the end of this period immerses in the mikvah, a status change occurs in the relationship because all of a sudden, when the woman comes out of the mikvah, they hit play on the dynamic of the relationship that's that intimate, essential connection. And what it actually creates on a psychological level, although that's not the reason it's done, but this is hard to refute, is that when you can't have something and when something's not available and when something, isn't there, your desire and your interest and your need goes up. Why? Is it because, people are weird? No, it's because human nature works that way. And the silliest example I could give you is, when schools were open here in Atlanta, there's a lot of traffic and I drive to 3 different schools for my kids. And so I take a water bottle with me and sometimes I'll drink a sip. Sometimes I'll take the whole thing. Sometimes, whatever, I won't even open it. But the day I forget to take a water bottle with me, all I'm thinking is, am I going to stop at Trader Joe's or the gas station or Whole Foods to get water because I'm so thirsty and I still have another hour in the car? So is that because, there's something strange? No, it's because human nature is, if I can't have something, I need it and want it more. So what happens in a relationship? Automatically, there's always going to be an ebb and a flow. And usually that distance comes when I'm upset at you, I'm angry, you hurt my feelings, I'm stressed, I'm anxious, I'm overwhelmed, I'm not in the mood, so there's a distance. And what happens in a relationship when there's a distance? Now that we're apart, I need to bridge this, and there's a desire to reconnect, so I got to do something to get back there to that good place. So God says, okay, listen, I know life's going to happen, and it's going to be stressful, but I want to be the reason why you're separated, and it's not because you're upset or you're angry, it's because this is how Torah's guidance is, that we're going to have this separation so that when we come together, it's sweeter and there's more joy and there's more passion, not just in the first few years when it's easy, but decades into a relationship when you have this cycle going. Most people will report the incredible magic that puts this on the map. And I'll tell you honestly, you may think this is something that only ultra-Orthodox, fanatic, crazy religious people do, but I'll tell you firsthand, Emory University is a college campus where the overwhelming majority, like 99 point, I don't know what percent, consider themselves secular Jewish students. And so many of them have decided, listen, I don't do kosher, I don't do Shabbat or whatever. It's not all or nothing. This mitzvah I want to do. Why? Because I want to also have this gift in my relationship where there's this ebb and this flow, and it's a divine blessing, and there's this renewal that happens. So in very short, mikvah is central to Jewish family life because it underscores the primary relationship between a husband and wife and how important not just them getting along and having a family are, but their actual private relationship. God cares about. Why? Like, seriously, if I go to a cheap motel, I get a sign on the door that says, do not disturb, and it's no one's business what goes on in my private life. And God says, you know what? If we're here to make the world a better place, and we're here to add goodness and light in the world, the best way to do that is one happy, healthy relationship at a time, one healthy couple at a time. And that's why mikvah is a priority of Jewish life. And that's why this series did a really disservice, not just to a community that prioritizes healthy relationships, to show a dysfunctional relationship, which again, could exist and does exist and for sure exists because human beings will come with all sorts of dysfunction. But as a community, the priority on healthy relationships and on healthy intimacy is so highlighted and so important. And for someone to come away with a message that it's otherwise is probably the reason why we're having this discussion. So we don't have to walk away thinking, wow, everybody has a loveless, sexless, cold, awful, intimate life. I really feel bad and I'm so sorry. And it couldn't be further from the truth. And I think you don't need to kind of take my word for it. If you feel comfortable to ask your own Chabad rabbis or rebbitzins, you want to study about it, you want to learn about it, you want to find out more details, start with Rabbi Google and go from there. But you'll see that this is really a foundation of Jewish life and living. And the more kind of someone adheres to that life, the more this will be a priority for an individual and a couple. So again, I wish I had more time because I literally didn't scratch the surface of how this whole thing works. But I hope you got enough to at least pique your curiosity and want to find out more, because I know it sounds pretty strange. And I just see faces. So I'm looking at some of your faces and I see like, huh? And I get that. And that's why we got to keep learning so that there's more information. And then your faces actually reflect that, that knowledge.
Thank you. The scene where Esty and Yankee meet and get engaged, does that accurately reflect the portrayal of how Hasidic people may date?
There is a very slim sector in the Hasidic world. I don't have the accurate numbers, but I would say it's probably 10 out of 100%, where what you saw, where, they kind of didn't have much time to even say hello, and there were cakes and fruits and wine ready to celebrate. And so although they did meet in person, there really wasn't any much of a connection or conversation, even ability to form that, because it was so, let's say short. I don't even know if I would say short and sweet. I'll tell you what's much more common, like in the 90% range, which will still baffle most of you because it is so different from what secular culture actually promotes. But before I tell you how it works, I'll tell you that the objective is completely different. In traditional Orthodox Hasidic dating, it is not recreational. You do not date for entertainment. You do not entertain because you do not date because like then I'll have someone to like go bowling or to the movies with, or to figure stuff out, about the birds and the bees or whatever. That's not the objective for Hasidic dating. Hasidic or traditional Jewish dating is done when an individual feels like I have an idea of who I am, kind of a little, and I know kind of what I'm looking for, and I'm interested in moving to that next stage of life where I'm going to build my own home and my own family and my own relationship. And the way that it works is that incredible amount of research is done behind the scenes on what this, the guy and the girl, the man and the woman are about, what their personality is, what their interests, what their hobbies, what their passions, what their commitments, etc. are. And it's not done by, Golda from Fiddler on the Roof, just PS. Usually it's family, it's friends, it's people who care about you. You may have heard the word shadchan, which means a matchmaker, but that sounds like someone who flies around on a broomstick saying, ooh, have I got a boy for you? Not so accurate. What's probably more accurate is a sister calls a cousin to say, you know what, my brother-in-law is really similar to your sister. That happens much more, kind of what we call organic networking. And the way it works is on paper, we kind of want to make sure that it lines up. But we all know that two people could look perfect on paper. They have the similar values and similar wants and needs and desires in life. But practically speaking, you could sit two people down in a room and there is no chemistry and no attraction and no interest between them. And the purpose of dating in a traditional perspective is that two young people should decide on their own. Even though the research may tell them this is a great candidate for you, they need to determine that I feel like I could create a life with this person. Now you're probably wondering, in how much time can one determine that? And I'll tell you, from extremely high success rates, when I tell my Emory students here that my husband and I knew each other for less than 2 months before we got engaged, so 10, 12, 15, 8, 7, whatever the number of dates that you might hear, they don't believe me. They're like, are you kidding? Because I dated someone for 2 years and then we lived together for a year. And then in the 4th year, we realized, no, thank you. How's it possible? So again, the perspective is different. From a traditional perspective, you do have to sit there. And what the dating process actually looks like is a whole lot of intense discussions. You're not, going to the circus together, but you may go, walk across the Brooklyn Bridge or sit in a nice lounge, but you're having real raw conversations to see if you feel that this individual jives, connects, and if there's chemistry. But really, you don't take a test drive until after the chuppah. So that's completely different from secular culture, where more or less you take it out of the garage before you even know what kind of car it is. And it's a very different perspective. But I think that the bottom line is that really the success rates speak for themselves, because it's extremely high level of marital satisfaction from this program and system. And we all also know, of course, there's obviously situations where it doesn't work out and it's not all happily ever after. And I don't want to place, an unrealistic, glossy photo that everybody's happy and everything works perfect. That would not be truthful. But on the same vein, on the flip side, I would say that people who know each other and are invested or in a relationship for 3, 4, 5, 6 years, and then decide to get married, the odds are also not so high of the, how this is going to work. And so the bottom line is the short dating is not a reflection of anything but a different system with a different objective. And the success rate of traditional marriages done in this sort of way is extremely, extremely high. Although what you saw on the series is a very small percentage where they have so little time to actually speak. Most, if you know anyone in your life who consider themselves Hasidic or Orthodox, and you ask them, there's people who date multiple people, there's people who go out for years, there's people who meet the same person, the right person right away. And I think that's reflected in broader society, where everybody's individual story is going to be unique to them. But I wanted to share the general structure and the general format for what the objective is and how it's typically done, obviously with room for exceptions and chaos and drama, because that's how God created the human experience to be. So I hope that gives a little bit more of a background and context to what you saw.
Thank you. So the kala teacher, the bridal teacher scene is just super awkward and cringeworthy. Does that actually really happen?
I'm just going to say I hope not, but I'll tell you a little bit deeper. And when I say I hope not, brides and grooms, I want to just show you, and not to criticize or critique the producers of this film, because I know they researched it and they did the best, job that they could, but it's different viewing something from the outside in versus from, a closer look. And I would just say, firstly, really important to point out, you do not see this groom learning with anyone. So while you're right, Sivi, that it was a cringeworthy scene with this instructor pulling out stuffed body parts that I never knew existed. I actually tried to Google it, like, could I buy one of these? This was awful. I never saw anything like it in my life. I don't know where they pulled that out of. But what's interesting was you don't see the groom actually learning with anyone, and there's no couple where only one party learns. In fact, what this groom should have learned, and what I would say all grooms actually learn, is the opposite of his behavior throughout the series, where there's no compassion, no understanding, and no warmth in terms of what this mitzvah of intimacy is actually about. But I do want to give you just, again, a personal context to this. For the last for the last year, I signed up, although I've been learning with brides for almost 2 decades, and many of them are actually completely secular, but they're curious and they're interested in learning more about, you know, Jewish traditions. And so what they do with it is their own prerogative. But I'll tell you that I'm in the middle of taking this intensive training course for bridal instructors, and I was blown away. Not just that we were learning rabbinic literature and halachic texts in their original sources with rabbis, etc., because that's obvious, but the amount of time and effort that actually went into every type of professional, from psychiatrists, psychologists, pelvic floor specialists, sex therapists, doctors, nurses, you name it, who actually share information of issues that may come up, challenges that a couple may have, whether it's a libido, whether it's interest, whether it's an emotional, psychological challenge. So today, your average bridal and groom instructor doesn't just have an understanding of Jewish law, but has a much broader understanding of human psyche and how it works. And actually, you did see in this series people trying to help this couple in different ways, because it took them a year to figure it out, which I think is, I'm sure most people who are coming with zero experience need some adjusting time and some figuring it out time, but a year to actually figure out the mechanics is really extreme. And I think what you did see there is there was a communal concern. So there was some sort of practitioner that came and gave her some items to try. And there was, we'll get to the meddling mother-in-law who offers her lube, which obviously wasn't helpful at all. But the bottom line is that most bridal instruction today, the greatest purpose that it serves, aside for providing halachic guidance and practical, technical tips and pointers, is that a bride and groom who are coming from a more sheltered background than what your average individual in society experiences, and maybe less, for sure less hands-on experience, but also maybe less exposure just to things out there in the world, is that they have a human contact, a person that they could call up and say, you know what, is this normal? I'm experiencing this, we're having this issue, because there's going to be issues, and to have someone to talk to who can then direct them to the professional that would be suitable to help them with whatever challenge they have, again, underscores the priority that this should be something beautiful, healthy, and enjoyable in a couple's life, and any resources that are needed. And believe it or not, in the Satmar community and in all Hasidic communities, there are practitioners and there are therapists and there are people who are licensed, you know, by the state of New York. And one of the presenters in the course, Amin, was from a Hasidic community. She's a certified psychiatrist, and she deals with marital issues and issues that people have with you know, hangups with intimacy, etc. And she has a booming business because human beings need help, and Torah encourages any human being at any point in life to reach out for the assistance that will make their life more joyful, more healthy, and more wholesome, because God needs functional people in the world to do good. Falling apart at the seams is not a mitzvah for anyone, and it's not healthy for anyone. So to sum it up briefly, you did see a little bit of what may have been some instruction, but I think the context of that relationship and the context of knowing that you have someone to talk to who you have this relationship with is actually probably the greatest service that the bridal or groom instructors offer to traditional boys and girls in the community as they're preparing for this very new stage in life.
Thank you. What role does having children play in a couple's relationship? Do they need to have many, many kids?
So I want to make a very strong distinction that I think is really important. In this series, it looks like the only reason for a couple to actually have an intimate relationship is in order to procreate and have children. Otherwise, there's no purpose. And I want to make a clear distinction that according to Jewish law and according to Torah, these are two separate mitzvahs. There's a mitzvah of ona, which we discussed, and mikvah, that pleasure and intimacy is prioritized, and that's separate, and we touched on that, so I'll leave it there. And there's a separate mitzvah, which is also, interestingly, given to men, that they should be fruitful and multiply, if you want to go all biblical. I'm from the South, so sometimes I can get away with that more than, Massachusetts. But what does it mean? That there's definitely a Jewish value and a Jewish focus to have a family and to have children and to pass on our traditions and our values and our morals. Definitely a big focus in Judaism to have children. Having said that, firstly, they're two separate things. Secondly, not everyone who wants to have children will be blessed with children. We know that. And in a traditional community, more than others, God is at the center, and people understand that God's the one who actually decides on this gift. While modern women are able to decide they don't want kids, deciding you want kids doesn't always mean you're going to have them. So that's one point to mention. And a more important point that I think people are probably curious about is, what if a woman doesn't feel like she could handle having as many kids as God gives her, whether it's mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, it's too much for her, she can't handle it. Does she have to? Like, is she forced to? And straight up answer is no. Halacha, and if you've ever been in a synagogue and they took out the Torah and they sing or they say, Eitz Chaim Hi, it's meant to be a tree of life, and you can't live with something if you're persecuted or burdened by it. And so Torah has incredible leeway for a woman to say, listen, mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, I don't feel up to this task. And so with the guidance of her rabbi, her doctor, her psychiatrist, her therapist, her gynecologist, whoever needs to be involved in making a decision for a woman is absolutely sanctioned by Jewish law and by halacha. And a woman isn't subjected or forced or must have children whether she could handle them or not. But again, it is a value and it is a priority. So you'll typically find that the average Hasidic or Orthodox family is larger than the norm. And whatever those numbers may be, it will range. But why is that? Because the value of prioritizing children and the effort that goes into raising them, and your money, your resources, your time are going to go there. That's a priority that you find within an Orthodox or a Hasidic community that maybe in secular culture, I might choose to prioritize, me and my career over having children. And obviously it's always a conflict for every woman and every couple to figure out that balance of what's healthy and what we can do and what we could manage and what our personal priorities are. But I just want to say that, yes, having children is an important mitzvah. It's also understood that not everyone's going to be able to have that, and that people will contribute to the community in different ways, because not everybody is able to have children, whether it's physiologically that they're unable to, or they don't feel they could handle it. And Torah allows for and provides working options for all human beings to feel that they have self-actualization and they could live a life full with meaning and purpose under halachic Torah guidelines. And that balance is something that's really varies from one individual and one family and one community to the next.
Thank you. That horrible scene with shaving her hair, is that something all Orthodox people must do? Can you shed some light on that?
So I think probably I don't have the technical ability to do that. And I'm like really new to even being able to turn on my own Zoom and get on and it worked. Like, I'm amazed at how much I learned in this interesting time about technology. But if I was able to, what I would do is I would unmute Rachi and Hindi and Khani and Sivi, and I would say, yo, I know it's not usually how Rebbitzins are addressed, but I'd say, do you shave your head? Like, now that we're coming out of the closet here, is your head shaved? And I'm pretty sure I know what the answer is, but you could shake your head. No, the overwhelming majority of Orthodox, traditional Hasidic women do not shave their head. So you want to know about the few that do, because in this series, and again, it's reflecting an individual story, so it is true, there are some people who do. It's not the entire community within Satmar. Some women do, not all of them do. It's dependent on their tradition and their culture, and there's a lot of kind of reasons that they give. The two most kind of understandable practice or tradition of where this comes from is, according to Jewish law, according to the Torah, a married woman is supposed to have her hair covered when she's out in public. And so what's very interesting about that is, in our culture, hair, just hair, is a $90 billion industry. That's with a B, because women are on some way, no matter how different we are from each other, women are obsessed with their hair. Short, long, I want it curly, I want it straight, I want it darker, I need to freshen me up, I don't feel good, I need to do something with my hair, whatever. And Judaism actually acknowledges that hair is essential kind of crown on a woman's head, and it's connected deeply with her essence and the sensual element of her nature. And so Judaism says that when a woman is married, she should direct and keep that energy for herself, meaning within her private personal confines of her relationship, and it shouldn't be something that's exposed in public. So the best place, give me a thumbs up if you've ever been to Israel, because this is probably the best place where you could see it. So thumbs up, anyone who ever visited, could have been 5 decades ago, it still counts. Anywhere you go in Israel, you probably see an incredibly beautiful array of how different Jewish women from different Jewish cultures and neighborhoods and backgrounds and traditions and choose to cover their hair. You'll see intricate turbans, and you'll see scarves and bandanas and baseball caps and bands and wigs with hats and hats with wigs and whatnot. And just to simplify it all, everyone's choosing to express this mitzvah in their own way. So you'll have traditional Jewish women that choose to cover their hair in many different styles and ways. Mostly what you may be familiar with, because I'm talking to everyone on this call, that the Chabad custom, because the Rebbe emphasized, was that it's a very deep misconception that people have, that why does a Jewish woman who's married cover her hair? To make her look unattractive. And that is absolutely untrue. A Jewish woman is supposed to be attractive, if anything better, not worse than anybody else, or whatever she feels is good for her. And what a woman feels comfortable with is what's good for her in terms of how she presents herself when she goes out in the world. But the Rebbe encouraged that because the mitzvah is not about other people, you don't need to know my head's covered. You don't need to know what I'm wearing on my head or if I'm wearing something on my head. I need to know that because it's the energy that I have that I'm directing, and it isn't about you. So your average, and I'm saying average, Hasidic woman covers her hair with something that looks like hair because it is. It's just not mine. So it seems strange. It is definitely kind of a lot to wrap your mind around. But I just want to focus on that scene, which I thought was so gut-wrenching, that this, beautiful young girl's having her hair shaved off. And again, if a woman wants to shave her hair because she thinks it's cool, or she wants to dye it pink, or she wants to, she's allowed to do whatever she feels like, makes her feel good. But generally speaking, halachically, there's a little bit of a issue with a woman who would do something that would make her unattractive, feel unattractive, or unattractive within the context of her relationship. So it's a halachic kind of issue. But there are women, a very small number, I would say it's probably, 5%, although you can't hold me to it, but that's my guesstimate here, who do have the custom where their hair is removed after their wedding, because they figure if a married woman shouldn't have her hair exposed, then it should always be covered and it should never be seen, and as well as immersing in the mikveh, which may cause an issue. I do want to point out, because I thought this was very interesting, in that scene where Esty is having her head shaved, there are some cousins there, young girls, and I had this look on my face where I was cringing, but these girls, because it was a normal rite of passage in their community, and it was something that was normal to them, not necessarily to me or to you, they were looking at it as oh, this is what you do. And so what's interesting about that is we all tend, when we look at, let's say, a third world country or a tradition that's completely foreign to us, we kind of look at their rites of passage or their traditions and cultures as being so strange or weird or crazy or barbaric, or we just generalize, that whole group they're terrorists, and that whole group they're gangsters, and that whole group they're crazy. And we tend to do that, but the truth of the matter is, when you're in a group, what's normal and pleasant and comfortable to you is what you experience. And so seeing those girls kind of watching it and thinking maybe some of them, and I actually called up a Satmar woman who I met recently she's actually, believe it or not, a COO of a very big company, and she was at Emory Hospital, and I brought her kosher food. I didn't know who it was. I just got this random call, and she was this Satmar woman from Williamsburg. This was a few months back, but I had her number, and I called her up, and I said, listen, I got a few things I want to dig up. So when I asked her about the shaving of the head, firstly, she didn't even know the series existed. She's like, no one where I live is talking about this, knows about it, or cares. It's not on our radar. We have other things to keep us entertained and busy. But what she did tell me is like, if something is normal to you, people look forward to it. It's like, this is, you're marking this new journey. And she had a very, normal, happy, positive take. But I was like, but come on. But, I was trying to like get her to, tell me something negative. And she was like, when you have something that's your custom and your tradition, it's what you do. It's what you know. It's beautiful to you. It's special to you. And it's hard for someone outside to relate or understand that. But I think that stretches our mind of the fact that God created a world filled with so many different individuals and so many different ways to express who we are. And what may seem very strange to one person is a beautiful, exciting rite of passage for another, and is the third person who's struggling with balancing what they even feel about that tradition or custom. And we have to kind of hold space for all of that. So in short, most Hasidic or Orthodox women that you meet do not shave their head, and do choose to cover it however they feel most comfortable. And again, that probably the idea of why covering and how and where the sources are is probably its own hour. But again, we're trying to move along and not take more than 4 or 5 minutes for a question, even though I feel like I'm talking so quickly because I'm like, I want to cram in so much, in the few minutes so that we can move along. So I apologize if I sound like I'm from New York. I'm not. I'm from New Jersey. Same issue, but I'll try to take it down here.
So thank you so much. Those were our general bigger questions. Now I'm going to give the floor to Rachi Kievman, and she's going to address the questions that have come in recently as we're speaking, and the questions that have come in before. The short questions people have in general about Hasidic lifestyle, and pretty much lots of Jewish questions. Rachi.
Hi, Miriam. Actually, Miriam is my classmate.
Hi, Rachi.
How are you? So a few questions came in, and I don't know that we're going to be able to cover all the questions, but let's start with the first one. So what's the deal with the fully clothed couple during intimacy? Is that the Jewish way?
So while you were transitioning from Tzivi to Rachi, I did click on that chat button, and I just want to comment. Somebody wrote, secular people know what the Kala's teacher's gadget was. I'm going to just say there are two things I was referring to. One is everyone knows what dilators are. It's not rocket science, but that wasn't the gadget I was referring to. It was the little stuffed anatomical part that I just had never seen, in stuffed form before. But just to clarify that, Rachi, to get to your answer, I'm going to quote a biblical verse because it's as much of a source as you could get to. When it's referring to, the intimacy between a husband and a wife, a man and a woman, from the Torah's original language, it says, and for anyone who isn't familiar with Hebrew, don't worry, I'll translate it, and it's only 3 words. It says, V'hayu libasar echad. They should be like one flesh. And that's like biblically knowing one another. And technically speaking, what that means, and all the commentaries actually explain it, is that nothing should come between a husband and wife. Not a white sheet with a hole, not some weird getup that I don't know where they picked up this white robe. It looked like the high priest on Yom Kippur. I tried to go on Amazon and see if I could get one of these. I don't know where it came from. Biblically, nothing is supposed to come between them. Halachically, there's no garb that is put on, some white robe or whatever this gear was. I don't know where the origin of where the producers pulled this out of. I am still researching and trying to find it. If I come up with any source, I will let you know. But I do want to go one step further, and that is that on a biblical level, physically nothing's supposed to come between them, like clothing or garments or sheets or whatever. However, from a Kabbalistic perspective and from a mystical perspective, it's a lot deeper than that. Not only is not physical clothing supposed to come between them, but also mental and emotional things shouldn't come between them. And what's interesting is even if you know only a little bit about like traditional Judaism, you probably know that Shabbat has a lot of rules, or Passover has a lot of rules, or any other practice of Judaism comes with like, the thick hardcover multi-language guidebook of all the how it goes. And the importance is obviously as important as sending an email. You miss a dot, you miss a dash, it's not getting to where it's meant to go. But I want to point out, and I think this is so important for, anyone within the community to understand that if you open the Code of Jewish Law, when it talks to the rules of like intimacy, actual physical intimacy, it's so short and it's so succinct. It's not chapters and books worth of information. It literally focuses on a few things: that a couple should not allow anything to come between them, not just things that are physical, but what things am I referring to? Anger, if I'm upset at you or you hurt my feelings or I'm angry, that's coming between us. If I'm thinking about someone or something else, that's coming between us. If I'm distracted by everything that's going on around me because I'm in, I don't know, a chaotic, hectic place, that's coming between us. And so what Torah says is, again, it's an ideal. It doesn't mean every couple every time is going to live up to this ideal. But what's the ideal is that intimacy should be me and you focusing on one another, not just our bodies, but our hearts, our minds, and our souls. And nothing should come between us, not on a physical level, not on an emotional level. And so, yeah, clearing my head and being present and focusing on the other is really a Jewish value, not just on a, biblical perspective, but even Kabbalistically and mystically. Nothing should come between a couple, ideally, and that takes a lot of work and a lot of effort to prioritize and make this a commitment, because it's so easy for everything to come between you, and then some. So it's, I think, a great question, because you only seem to be asking about, physical garments, but nothing's just that shallow. It actually represents something much deeper and much more real. Again, I think I've expressed that I don't think the whole intimate, sexual, personal life of your average traditional Orthodox Hasidic couple is portrayed. If someone took this story and faced it over a whole community, it would be an extreme disservice to everyone in that community, while again allowing for individual dysfunction, because that obviously exists.
Yes. What's up with the mother-in-law? Intensely meddling mother-in-law.
So please forgive me if I throw everyone under the bus, but generally speaking, Jewish mothers, mother-in-laws, daughter-in-laws, sister-in-laws do not have such a great reputation when it comes to not being meddlers. I think maybe we invented the whole helicopter mom thing. It's very strong in our collective DNA, in all communities, in all places in the world. Not Hasidic, they don't own this business. And I would say that, yes, you saw a meddling mother-in-law, because there are a lot of meddling mother-in-laws in that community and in all sorts of Jewish communities, and probably in all communities everywhere. But if you want to know what is Torah's value, does the Torah, and I keep referring to the Torah as God's blueprint and guidebook for how Jews live their life, does Torah actually recommend that mother-in-laws be really involved? Because we know it's coming from a good place. We know they have their heart in the right place, and they care and they love and they want to help. And the simple answer is that if Judaism prioritizes healthy relationships are best served when you're called out on when you're needed. And when you're not, you don't meddle and you don't mix and you don't interfere. So yes, we send our love, and we're here for you when you need us, Bobala and Mamala. But mixing and meddling and telling you what to do and how to do it and giving you advice when you don't need it and you don't ask for it, as you saw, this was depicted quite accurately. It caused so much more pain and so much more suffering for this couple to have all these meddling family members trying to be helpful, and they caused more harm. And I think that's just a good takeaway in our own lives. Can I be more of service to those in my life by taking a step back, offering my presence and my love in a way that's actually helpful to the person, not in the way that I think is helpful to the person. And there's a huge distinction between what I think is helpful and what I think you need, but what you actually think you need. And I think we all could take a lesson. So yes, will you find meddling mother-in-laws in traditional communities? Yes, you will. You will find them in all Jewish communities. We got this thing really hot and heavy going through our gene pool, and we all need to try to tone it down, because ultimately I don't think it's so helpful. And very often you see how it causes more harm. So a good takeaway for all of us to learn from, just help in a way that the other person finds helpful.
Very good point, Miriam. That was one of my favorite. What's up with the silver foiled Passover kitchen. Is that a thing?
It's a little bit of a thing. I'll tell you about it. Okay. So we all laugh when it gets close to Passover and the memes go around. They're like, hey gals, you got out your foil. Where does this come from? What's up with the aluminum foil? So really, I'll be honest and say most of us have visited Home Depot or Lowe's or whatever your favorite shop is. And we found way cooler ways to cover our counters for Passover, whether it's linoleum, whether it's tiles, whether it's vinyl. But where does this come from? So very, very briefly, all year long, we eat cakes and cookies and crumbs and carbs and whatnot that on Passover we're supposed to remove. So we clean the house, but then because the surface of the kitchen, meaning the island and the counters, actually had this food, crumb, flour, challah, you name it, on it all year, not only do we clean it, we cover those counters as well for the duration of Passover. So all the food that's prepped for Passover is done on a clean surface. So silver foil is durable, it's cheap, it's easy to get a hold of, and very often you would walk into any kitchen where Passover was being observed in the traditional way, you would see lots of foil. What I will tell you is the extreme measures that the series showed, I had such a laugh because I think the light bulbs were covered with foil, the railings, the handles, the like things that you can actually access if they have foil on them and don't need to be covered with foil because no food is going on the, you know, the air conditioner vent in the ceiling, was very much exaggerated. I had a laugh because foil is still something you'll find, you know, covering a hood of an oven. It's easy to do it with foil. It works, it gets the job done, and that's something that actually has food, you know, hitting it. But I will say that, yes, finding foil in a kitchen in strange places on Passover is accurate, but the amounts and the things that were covered in foil gave anyone who even used this foil probably a good laugh because it was like color war level scene of how much foil was, you know, everywhere. And when she walked, I was thinking like, I know what the foil's about, but I was thinking, my gosh, if people are watching it, what do they think? That like in Hasidic communities, part of the Passover story is to make your home look like a spaceship so we could like leave Egypt quickly. Like what's the significance? There was no context or explanation why Esty walked into a fully silver foiled kitchen. I kind of had that and I'm thinking like my grandmother who's, you know, considers herself a very radical feminist secular woman. She's like, what's up with that foil? I mean, come on, you put a little on the stove. Like, and I was like, yeah, try to explain that that's the big problem here. You know, a little too much foil. It's forgiven. It's okay. Foil is used a little bit less. But that's the reason. It's a Passover custom to get all crazy about being, you know, all about the matzah and not about the challah.
How common is the shady cousin character, Moshe, in Hasidic life?
So this character is, I think, really interesting because he's obviously very, he's got a lot of addictions. He's got a lot of interesting past that you're not so sure about. And he's pretty shady. He does whatever he thinks is right, whether it's moral, whether it's ethical, whether it's kind. And he doesn't seem to be an overall very good person. And so what's interesting about that is when you have a character like that in a community where people are putting so much effort and emphasis into living a life with morals, with values, with guidelines, with honesty, with integrity, it's particularly like jarring. However, I will be honest and say that every single community, Satmar, Chabad, Orthodox, modern Orthodox, have individuals and more than one individual, not one Moshe, that is struggling and is challenged and is conflicted and is working on themselves, but is a big mess in process. And so to characterize someone like that, it's a truth because being a human is not easy work. And even if you have guidelines and values to go by, that doesn't mean that you always line up with what you know to be true and right. And a shady character like that who's not really following what he's supposed to be doing on an ethical level and on a godly spiritual Torah level is a truth, but it's an uncomfortable truth because we would like to think, and we're much more comfortable to think, if you're religious, you're a perfect person. If you're religious, you do everything right. And if you ever dare to mess up, OMG or oy vey or oy gewalt or whatever Jewish term you want to throw, it's unacceptable. And the truth of the matter is people should be held at a higher accountability level if they're professing to live a life committed to God. However, human frailties will appear and will, come to light. And we see that throughout history. No human being is an angel, no matter what community they're a part of. So it does exist. The hope is that it is few and far between, and the majority are people who are also works in progress, but more ethical and moral and kind and menschlich, which is the word. Every time he appeared on screen, I was like, this guy's not a mensch. And we all hope to be a mensch. And no community has a patent on it, but we all strive for it, and we all come up short at different times.
Thank you. What if someone is miserable in their marriage or family life? Is there a way out?
So that's a very important question, and the answer is yes. Judaism provides for divorce. There's entire tractate that discusses the parameters and what goes into a get. Today, what's most common practice is that there's a halachic prenup. So the hope is that this should be happily ever after, and it should be a beautiful relationship, to have a beautiful home filled with love and joy and passion. In the event that something occurs, or usually it's not one thing, but things unravel and this couple cannot make it work, and they've tried and they've invested, but it's deemed, irreparable, it's kind of viewed, and I know this is going to sound harsh, but it's kind of viewed like an amputation. Like, you don't ever want to lose a limb, God forbid, but sometimes you have to in order to live. And if you have to do this, there's a way to do it. And it's done obviously through the guidance of halachic Jewish law, as well as the normal lawyer routes of what state you live in and what those parameters would be, because we're living in a culture where there's very clearly defined laws for these type of situations. And the simple answer is Torah does allow, and Torah does have rules and regulations that go into a couple needing a way out. They can get out. And I mentioned before, in terms of, because you said regarding a family, what if someone doesn't feel like they could have a family or they're able to? Birth control is something that is used in Hasidic communities when it's needed and when it's necessary. So basically the answer is yes to both. Marriage and divorce are things that occur, and families that you're managing or you're not managing do occur. And both of those are, I would say, relatively common, in that the human experience provides ample opportunity for these parts of human experience to be experienced in Hasidic communities as well.
Thank you for that. What about playing instruments or singing? Is that forbidden for Hasidic women?
So I'm going to separate the two, because in this series, you see that playing the piano, was frowned upon. And I think that is something where it's very hard to understand where that came from, because actually in real life, Williamsburg or any Satmar community, there's incredible talent, musical, singing, performing, dancing, art, and it is expressed and it is celebrated. However, where it gets mixed up is there is a Jewish law that a Jewish woman, an individual woman, shouldn't perform in front of a male audience. It's considered to have kind of an immodest or an overly sensual connotation. And so what happens if a woman, and I have Hasidic women who are friends of mine, 3 who I know personally, that are extremely gifted and talented, writing songs, singing, playing their own arrangements and playing music, and they actually have musical careers. Now, it may not look like your typical secular, success on, what's that show where you, you perform and then you know what I'm saying, right? America's Got Talent, right? I missed that. So it might not look like that, but they perform for huge conventions and women's camps and bat mitzvahs and events and women's parties, and they teach young girls, and they have musical careers, and they have albums. So they are expressing that talent, but it is done within the constructs of this traditional model. So to say that, oh my gosh, if you're limited with whom you can perform in front of, and this doesn't apply, obviously, to like groups of women singing together. They're allowed to. It's specific to kind of a woman performing in front of men in this sensual context. So to say that because there's a restriction there, which is accurate, therefore women cannot have a talent, cannot play an instrument, cannot sing to anyone ever, you know, and then you could take it, well, then they can't paint and then they can't dance. And then it's just simply untrue. But what I think kind of happened, and maybe in this series it was because her piano instructor wasn't Jewish, it seems, so maybe that was the worry, that like she's going to be a bad influence more than the actual instrument. But practically speaking, there are musicians and painters and artists and dancers from the Satmar community, and generally speaking, not even talking about the specific community, from a Jewish perspective, which I keep trying to like bring it back to, from a traditional Torah perspective, God blesses each of us with incredible talents and gifts, and we're meant to use them, and we're meant to share them, and we're meant to develop them. Otherwise, why would God give them to us? So in a way that works for each individual, whatever talent you have should be expressed and celebrated and shared and experienced. And that's the Jewish perspective. And there's so many examples, if I had the time to go into, where in Jewish history we see music and art, you know, and people expressing their talents, building and creating and crafting and forming and all that, that human beings can bring so much beauty into the world through those gifts, and they're meant to use them.
Thank you, Miriam. So somebody was just asking, what's the response and the reaction when individuals leave the community?
So I think it's a painful reality. And that is that anytime you have any people who raise their children with a certain kind of path or objective in mind, and then your child rejects what you instilled or what you educated or what you taught them, it's painful for parents to digest that. And everybody goes through that process in a different way. So I'll give you a personal example that's not from a Hasidic perspective, but when my dad was in college, he was at University of Maryland, and he told my grandparents, I want to drop out of school because I want to go to yeshiva. I'm really interested in studying about Judaism. And my grandparents, who are liberal, loving, welcoming, accepting people, you know what they told their son? If you dare drop out of college, we will not talk to you. Now, what kid, is that supportive? Is that, you know, helping him choose his own path? No. But why do they do that? Because that's generally what humans do. So within a traditional community, when you raise your kids with values and traditions, and then they choose to leave, it's usually a painful process that this relationship is having, you know, this friction, and how each individual family unit gets through it will vary. Generally speaking, just to generalize here, I'll tell you that because Chabad has such an emphasis on loving one another, ahavat Yisrael, respecting one another, appreciating one another, and seeing the good and the soul that we have in common, in Chabad communities, that transition, while still challenging for each individual family to work through your choices and our choices and your respect for our ways and our respect for your ways, it's complex. But the general approach is, I love you and you're our family and you're welcome, even though we have to talk about some of these really serious issues or details. And generally speaking, because the Satmar community has more of a closed door policy, there are too many stories of people who have chosen, whether it was psychological or theological or whatever reason was, that they did not feel they could live in this community. And when they left, like Deborah Feldman, who the book is based on, didn't really have much of a connection with her family. And that's so painful and so tragic. But there are also many writers, I've read articles in the Forward and at CNN, of other women who also left a similar community, or even the Satmar community if it was the same, and do have warm and loving connections with, maybe not all, but a good number of family and friends from their community. And so why I'm mentioning that, because it's really just to illustrate that there's not one story for everyone. Some communities, it is harder to maintain that connection because there's more of a, if you reject what we're doing, you're kind of out the door. And other communities have a more open-minded perspective. But I think even within Satmar, which again is the most extreme kind of fringe of this umbrella, you have more and more families learning and understanding to appreciate that your child is always your child, and you must love your child no matter what your child's choices are. We need more of it than we have, but we're as each year goes by, people are learning and people are understanding how vital a family connection is, not just because it's important in and of itself, because that's what actually God wants of us, to treat each other with love and respect and not reject people because they rejected values that we hold dear. So again, there is a lot of variation from family to family, and some communities are easier and more, so to speak, I wouldn't say tolerant, but more loving and accepting you versus rejecting your choices than others. And ultimately, it brings a lot of pain to any family anywhere on planet Earth when kids reject what their parents raised them, you know, to embrace and to practice. And it ain't easy.
No. Thank you. That was beautiful. What about, does a series like this cause an increase in anti-Semitism?
So I'm not in any way an expert in what causes the fluctuation, increase or decrease of anti-Semitism. I think we're all a little bewildered what we're seeing around us and why and what its causes are. So I don't really know that answer. What I do know is anytime you have a series where people watching it walk away with a positive impression about Jewish people, their values, their culture, their history, their heritage, it ups, not just for anti-Semitism, I'm saying from people outside of the Jewish community, but within the Jewish community, within our own family, we feel pride and we feel joy when we're made to look good as a people. And when even one of us again, in our family, so we're saying siblings, you're so different from me. I don't get you. I don't know why you do what you do. I don't know. But it doesn't make any of us look good when someone, or I'm saying someone, it's not an individual. And I think I've underscored that enough times that you'll understand that I'm not putting down any individual. But when you put a community in such a light where they're very puppet-like and they're very not warm and they're very not kind-hearted and loving and understanding and accepting and they're rigid and they're weird, it doesn't do good for anyone, because Jews don't feel pride seeing that. It's fascinating. It makes for great cinema and great, entertainment, because it's drama and it's interesting and oh my gosh, I need to see what happens next. So it does sell. And people are watching it and it's streaming. I think New York Times said it was one of the top Corona streaming series, but it's not because it makes us look good. And really, what could we do about that? Like, what practical thing could we do about that? We could, each and every one of us, be an ambassador for our own family, but also out into the world with any friends or colleagues or neighbors who may ask us, hey, is this actually what's done? To share whatever it is that we do know, whether it's from our discussion tonight or really just the fundamental Jewish idea that if you know Aleph, you share Aleph. And then if you learn Bet, the next letter, so you can share and teach that. You don't need to be an official teacher. You don't need to have a degree. You don't need to be an academic. If you know something, you share it. And that's a value that Jewish people have had throughout our entire history, sharing what I know to be true, and being a positive light and a positive role model and example is the greatest way to model what Judaism actually does value. And nothing speaks louder than action. So I think, to answer your question, I didn't feel pride and joy seeing it. I felt like, oh my gosh, where's God's PR team? It's making the whole program look so, I don't know what adjective I want to, put in there, but it's not a positive adjective. And I really wish that there were series that were fascinating and captivating and did focus on human challenge and struggle, but had warmth and vitality and life and passion and joy along with it. And I saw too little of that and too much of the other stuff from my own personal perspective. I know not everyone will agree and not everyone will be eye to eye, and we should not all agree, because that's not the Jewish way. But I think ultimately we do need more things out there to be, not more things, more people to be good ambassadors for our family, and shows and books that actually aren't exposés uncovering some like dark, deep, dirty family drama, which we all know exists, but rather that exposes communities that are really unknown because they're so sheltered, and people are fascinated with what goes on, but actually shows it in a more balanced, accurate light where you could see why it's attractive and why so many people in these communities are living vibrant, happy, healthy, passionate, meaningful lives, which again, I didn't see a whole lot of, and I wish I saw more of.
Yes, thank you, Miriam. There's so many questions. I don't know that we're going to get through all of them, but here's another one. Are kids kept away from the mom who leaves the community?
So I will tell you that it's not just mom or dad. Usually within this type of community, the focus and the emphasis is to keep the children within the community with whoever, whether that's mom or dad, meaning whoever's leaving, generally speaking, the community doesn't want to see the kids going. So having said that, the practical matter is that we live in a country where there are laws, and these are all fought out in law, in legal court battles with judges and jurists and lawyers. And so, who wins this kind of custody case? Often it's kind of like what goes on everywhere in the world. It's who has the better team, who has the better lawyers. Often from a community perspective, they want to see the children living within this traditional community and not leaving with the parent who's leaving, whether that's mom or dad. And I'm sure you're bringing this question up, whoever the question is, because there have been news stories about the struggle of, an individual single woman who had such a crazy battle to have custody of her kids. And that's painful and that's wrong. And a mother shouldn't be kept away from her children. And I think that we do have to put it in context that while that may be a tendency to kind of see the kids within this stable environment that they used to and that they're raised in, there are so many factors to take into account from one story to the next. And ultimately, these decisions are made by judges, and not all of them are correct decisions, not all of them are supported decisions, but it's a very complex thing, because when you take one story and then you say the entire community does this to everyone at all times, in all cases, it's just another example of kind of stereotyping. And while that story may indeed be true and painful and awful, it isn't what happens to everybody at all times. And we got to kind of, look at the context and the nuance to get an appreciation. So I hope that's a little bit clear that, yes, there is a tendency to try to keep the children with whichever parent is staying within that familiar community for the children. But there's, for every story of someone who couldn't get their kids, there's people who could, and it's not dependent on if you're male or female, because there's stories that go both ways, whether it's the dad fighting, the mom fighting, the dad leaving, the mom fighting. Overall, it is tragic. Overall, anyone going through that needs our love, needs our support, and doesn't need to have more things to, fight with than what they already have to deal with.
Thank you. Now, I know it's getting so late, but there are so many questions. Miriam, are you up to a couple more?
Yeah, go for it. It's like, this is what's wild about Zoom. No one has to get home. Like, you're home. You don't have to get in bed. You're in bed. You don't have to kick your shoes off. They're off. It's like, yeah, just none of my kids came knocking on my door. So I'm yours. So you can hit a few more questions my way, and we'll see what.
But to also keep in mind, if we did not get to your question, definitely reach out to your Chabad, to your local Chabad or rabbi or rebbitzin, and I'm sure they could help you and answer your questions. So here's this question. Somebody wants to know, do kids get to decide for themselves if they want to stay Chabad, or could they explore secular lifestyles?
So this is what the challenge is. The challenge is that I'm talking to you, Rachi, and not to the person who asked the question. If I knew who ask the question, what I would say is, when you say kids, what age are you talking about? Because what I'll just generalize here is that children all across the globe are under the jurisdiction, sounds like a scary word, of their parents. So if their parents decide you can pick whatever you want and do whatever you want and be whatever you want, the children will have that prerogative. And if parents decide we're educating you within this community or with this lifestyle or with this understanding or these morals, values, traditions, then generally speaking, the children are going to be recipients of their parents' education up until the point when they are no longer under their parents' domain. And that's just a general rule of life. So if you want to know, generally speaking, young kids, for example, God blessed my husband and I with 8 young kids. Right now, my oldest is just 18, so we still got everybody in the especially now, we're all under one roof, but we got everybody in our jurisdiction. So yes, I'm raising my children to value what the Rebbe valued, which is loving one another, seeing the soul in each one, seeing what good we could bring to the world, seeing what purpose we have, seeing how we could be of service, seeing how we could help. Those are values that I hold dear, that I hope I'm doing an okay job of passing on to my kids, that they would choose on their own to actually continue that path. Now, what happens if a child reaches the level where they're no longer in the parents' home and they decide, you know what, I have other things in mind? Generally speaking, I know most parents don't ever like to hear this. It's really not in your control at that point. You plant the seeds, you water those roots, you give over whatever really is important to you. And at a certain point, and that's why I'm saying where that point is, may be a little bit hazy. An individual is no longer a child in their parents' home. They are now their own person with their own self-actualization. And you hope that your values and your, modeling of what you feel to be important is embedded within the hearts and souls of your kids, and wherever and whatever and however they go out into the great big world that God created, they do it with what you hope they take with them. And what happens if they don't? You send them love, you wish them well, you keep your door open, you always accept and embrace them, and you see what God has in mind, because every individual's journey is not going to be identical. And I think the bottom line is, no, for example, just to be like real here, my kids until Corona, not one of them owned any device with a screen. Why? Because I chose to filter. I decided that most of the things that they would just, browse on YouTube or pick up, on, I don't know, Sunday morning cartoons, have more things that I would rather them not see than values that I'd rather them see. So I get to choose, because I'm the parent that I'm filtering. Doesn't mean they don't see anything ever, because, there are shows and are performers, and there are obviously Jewish values and entertainment for children that I approve of and I think is awesome and my kids love. There's even a Barnum and Bailey kosher circus with all the animals and whatever, but it's done with, a little bit more Jewish costumes and a little bit, so I get to choose what I want my kids to be exposed to. And at a certain point, my kids will either say, hey guys, thanks, or, I don't know if I'm going to make those choices for myself. And I think that is something that is not unique to being a Chabad woman or a Hasidic woman. It's what every single parent, hopefully, has this beautiful process with their children. And I think ultimately, it's safe to say that, yes, most, you asked specifically, the questioner asked specifically about a Chabad family, but I think most families do try to give their kids, a strong foundation. And there are people, I know my kids go to a preschool where, most of the children are coming from very secular homes. It's a Chabad preschool, so it's a big, gamut and range of who's attending. And there are parents that are like, I know my kid's 5, but my kid's going to choose, all whatever. I'll just expose them to a little of everything and my kid will choose. And I choose to say that I'll let them make that choice when they're a little more mature and a little older and a little wiser. And I'm choosing right now to choose for my 5-year-old. But I respect you, and God gave you your children to raise in the way that feels right to you, and I will do the same for mine. And I think that's what's important, is that the love and the respect for different people's choices is more important than the choices, is the people making the choices.
Very well said. What has been, I don't know if you know this, what has been the general public response to this in the Hasidic circles in general and in the Chabad community specifically?
So I did mention that generally speaking, it's really kind of a shame, because the Satmar community is such an easy target. You can depict them however you want, and they're not even going to know. And they're certainly not going to stand up or picket or protest or defend, because they don't even know why, because generally speaking, they are not subscribing to Netflix, and they do not watch the majority of what is kind of seen as entertainment in our general culture. So that's what I would say is probably an accurate answer from the Satmar perspective, which is the actual group depicted in this series. But you also mentioned the Chabad perspective, and I'm going to point to y'all, as we say here in Atlanta, right here. This is a perfect example of a Chabad response. Probably your rabbi and Rebbitzin didn't even need to see this series to know people are interested in talking about it, and there's so many things that we can educate and we could learn and we could discuss and we could share and we could all walk away enriched if we have a discussion about this series, whether we agree or disagree, we like it or don't like it. It's about the people, it's about the knowledge, it's about empowering each one of us with education. And so the Chabad approach is whatever tool, let's use it. And I'll give you a good example. Aside for the military of the United States, one of the very first, not just religious organizations period, to take advantage of the internet. We're talking when it was literally first out on the scene, before it was even a thing, was Chabad. Why? Because the philosophy is that everything in this world can be used to serve God. Every tool and every outlet can be channeled for something good and for some good cause. So yeah, we could all admit that the internet has a lot of dirt. But we could all also say that it has such a gift and such a wealth of knowledge and information. It's all a matter of how we choose to use it. And so this series is a great example. Satmar probably, they're not defending it or explaining it because they're not seeing it and they don't know that you're seeing it and they're not talking to you to have that conversation. Case in point, I told you I called this Satmar woman that I went and she was like, what are you talking? Like what? She didn't know what I was talking. And she's a with it CEO of an extremely successful company. She's not locked up in her kitchen attached to a vat of chicken soup barefoot in Williamsburg. She's, just saying that. But I think the bottom line is, and what's Chabad doing? Exactly what we're doing here. Did we see it? It's not important. What is this? It's a drama. It's a TV series. It's meant to, entertain people. And it's probably done that pretty well. But let's use it as an educational opportunity to delve deeper into what Judaism has to teach us and what the actual Torah perspective is, however you saw it depicted. Come away with a little more background and a little more knowledge. That's the Chabad approach, and that's really the Jewish approach. It's like in real estate, they say what matters? 3 things: location, location, location. And what matters Jewishly? Education, education, education. So that's what we're doing. That's our response. That's our approach.
Beautiful. So I think we're done for the evening. But before we close the evening, I want to thank Miriam. You did an awesome job. I'm inspired. I'm ready to learn some more. I'm ready to change the world. But before we end the evening, let's all close our eyes and cover our eyes with our right hand. And let's say the prayer of Shema. Let's think about all the people that are not well. Let's think about blessings for our family, for our community, for the whole entire world. And let this coronavirus just go away, just like it came. So cover your eyes with your right hand. And Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. You may take your hand off. And I would love to give a round of applause. Everybody help me. To Miriam Lipskier for doing an awesome job and for really reaching out to all the questions. And I think if you have any other questions, please reach out to your local Chabad rabbi or rebbitzin.
I'll just say a l'chaim because, during Corona, it's very important that you get your allotted l'chaims in each day. That's what I was told to stay sane. So I want to say l'chaim, but I want to leave you with one last little teaching. Most of us think l'chaim means cheers in Hebrew, but it doesn't mean cheers. L'chaim, just like the word chai means life. You get a chai necklace, or people say hi, which is a totally different thing. Chai, right? It means life. But l'chaim, when I hold up my glass and I say l'chaim to you, the actual word is in plural, like l'chaim, many lives. And why is that? Because according to Judaism, how do we have a happy, cheerful, good life? By having others in our life with us. And focusing on relationships is what actually is the Jewish secret. Healthy relationships is the Jewish secret to l'chaim, to a life filled with plurality, with diversity, with others. And having that love and understanding actually gives us a rich and beautiful life. So l'chaim to all my beautiful soul sisters and brothers out there. Stay strong, hang in there. And as Jews always like to end off, we say, we bless one another that we should merit the coming of Mashiach. And people are like, Mashiach, that sounds so scary. Even it has a ch in it. It's like, oi. But really, what does it mean, Mashiach? A world where there's peace, harmony, health, and sanity and beauty and joy, everything we want. That's what it means. So not the opposite of, dysfunction and challenge and drama and pain and sickness. What we're asking for is good health and mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional sanity and blessing in a revealed way where we could see it and taste it and appreciate it. So l'chaim, thank you for having me. I love traveling, this way. It's awesome. And it's a pleasure to have spent this evening with you. So l'chaim, teaching everyone, and thank you.
Thank you, Miriam.
Miriam.
L'chaim. Beautiful.